Just over 3 years ago, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt tantalized us with an immersive world we explored in depth from the third person. 3 years later, expectations that their newest game, Cyberpunk 2077, would take on the same perspective have essentially been dashed. Cyberpunk's going to be first person, and it's obviously taken a lot of gamers by surprise. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, we ask the question, why is Cyberpunk 2077 going to be in first-person perspective? Way back in Witcher 3, we were given an idea of exactly what was coming. Ciri, a traveler of many worlds, told us about the world of Cyberpunk. This essentially canonized Cyberpunk as part of the video game Witcher universe, which is a really weird thing to think about, but it also did some other things. People are pattern predictors. We notice things repeat, and we always make predictions. That's why some of us, who are particularly good at predictions, seem to have a sixth sense. It's not necessarily about having a supernatural ability, it's about interpreting the world as it is now and making a good guess as to where things are going. When Ciri talked about the world of Cyberpunk in Witcher 3, it created an expectation, both consciously and unconsciously, that Cyberpunk 2077 was basically going to be Techno-Witcher. And because Witcher is so darn good, the idea of Techno-Witcher is also really not that bad of an idea. In fact, it sounds very cool. The same thing as Witcher, but in a cyberpunk city where corruption runs rampant and magic is replaced with technology. I mean, that just sounds automatically great, assuming it's made by the same people as Witcher 3, and it is. But during the course of this year's E3, we found out that is just not happening, at least in the form we thought. Cyberpunk 2077 is a first-person game, and the action in it is shooting, essentially. It is a first-person shooter, which is not what any of us expected. I mean, none of us. Like, there could have been speculation somewhere about this being an FPS, but I haven't seen it. And also, Projekt Red is clearly not a first-person shooter company. They've made role-playing games since forever. But here we are, an FPS RPG, and honestly, it kind of makes sense. Now, I'm not saying that means it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying I get the rationale behind it. But I think there's a certain piece of the puzzle we had to consider. Ciri's recollection of the world of Cyberpunk.
The world where Eridan couldn't find you. What was it like?
You wouldn't believe me if I told you.
Try me.
People there had metal in their heads, waged war from a distance, using things similar to megascopes. And there were no horses. Everyone had their own flying ship instead.
Ciri, stop fooling around.
What I love so much about this moment is it acts essentially as a teaser for the game that we're going to play in 3 years. But the way she describes them having metal in their heads and waging war from a distance is almost blatantly telling us it's an FPS. Ciri is talking about being inside the head and waging war from a distance. In retrospect, we should have known, but we didn't know. We thought they were just developing the next Witcher game. And because of that, we've spent 3 years imagining what Techno-Witcher was going to be. And being we're all very excited for Techno-Witcher, we created our own expectations, we created our own game, essentially, that we hoped was going to happen to be the real game. But let's be honest, what third-person game, shooter-wise, a game with guns, which Cyberpunk absolutely has guns as established by the previous lore of the board game, that wasn't gonna work in third person? Between that and all the different cybernetic implants, the amount of control you would have in a third-person situation isn't actually that ideal. So what we at gameranx understand of the game, what we've seen, it's very easy to describe it as Deus Ex on steroids. But I think there's another piece of influence that needs to be acknowledged that I think really unlocks what's being talked about. It really reminds me of Dishonored, or maybe Techno-Dishonored, and not like Prey, even though Prey was good, but it's a very abstract story, and obviously Cyberpunk isn't really. Still, the Arcane Games approach, I feel like it's at least somewhat of a factor on what we know of this game. I'm not saying that it explicitly feels like those games, but there's stuff that reminds me of those games. And there is stuff that reminds me of Deus Ex as well. And there's also some heavy role-playing stuff that makes me even kind of think of Mass Effect in a lot of ways, or at least even what Mass Effect was reaching for. A lot of what I think they envisioned was being able to experience the modifications, the powers, and the world in a very interactive way, and it's just so hard to do that in the capacity they imagined in third person. And there are going to be a lot of people that disagree over whether this was the right move or the wrong move. But I think for the game that they're making, it just doesn't make sense to do third person. And this is coming from somebody who had made the third person game in their head thinking, oh, it's going to be great. There's so much potential in first person for what they're trying to do that it makes perfect sense to me. And the thing is they've sacrificed none of the RPG stuff. It is as much an RPG as The Witcher, but with a combat system that just, it's nothing like The Witcher. And that kind of excites me because in every way I was sort of expecting a thing that I knew, but what I'm getting is a thing that looks intriguing and makes me want to see, makes me want to understand, makes me want to go further within the constructs of the world that's being created and the systems that are being created to interact with the world. It's going in a different direction than I thought, but instead of disappointing me, it's got me kind of excited. Let's not forget that CD Projekt Red absolutely does not look at things in the same way as other people. One of the designers at CD Projekt Red, Max Piers, in an interview said, "We wanted to test ourselves as a studio as well, and what better way to do it than a game which, as you've seen in the demo, feels similar to Witcher in certain ways, but different in others. Which is why we love that philosophy of it's ready when it's ready. We want you to want to come back." The quest designer, Patrick Mills, I think backs up a lot of what I was talking about earlier regarding the control of the various powers. V, the character that you're going to play as in the game, is not intended to be any specific person. You're intended to roleplay further in this game rather than assume the role of Geralt. V is in many ways going to be dependent on you for their characterization. This of course isn't a new idea, but in some respect in third person you understand that you are playing someone else, and in first person you're a little more immersed, which is another thing that Patrick Mills said. And it makes sense to me. I can't tell you what my preference is going to be until I play the game, but I'm intrigued. And ultimately, that's what I want to be. So I get it. I understand why it's a first-person game. It's really up to them whether it's good or not at this point, and honestly, I have pretty high hopes. This game has looked like a gift from day one. What's your opinion? I understand that there is a lot of specific disappointment over this, but I think over time, it's going to at least make sense. Again, we can't assert the quality until we've actually played the game, and none of us have, but we've seen it, and it's pretty convincing as to why it's a first-person game. So leave us a comment, tell us what you think. If you thought this video was worthwhile, click that like button, and if you're not subscribed, now of course is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is of course a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon, you can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.